Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and this video is about Windows file sharing and assigning network access. So the goals of this video is to understand why we use file sharing in the workplace, also how to share files and folders effectively. We will also talk about the differences between network sharing, file sharing, and their different types and permissions, understand how the different permission types work, and learn how to access all of those shared folders efficiently. Okay, so before we get started with this video, just a heads up that the first part is talking about the basics of Windows file sharing, the different types, different permissions, difference between NTFS and shared permissions, inherited and explicit permissions, and different sharing methods. So first part is the lecture, and the second part is more on the hands-on activities and showing you how everything is done and some real-world examples. So if you already know the basics of Windows file sharing, you can skip part 1 and just go ahead and proceed to part 2. So let's get started with this video. Okay, let's get started with the file and folding sharing types. There's two sharing types. First is the local. So local sharing is sharing files and folders on the same local network without the need of internet. An example of this would be the public folder sharing. So this is simple sharing for all users on the same PC or network. Another sharing type is network sharing. This is sharing files and folders across multiple computers within a network. This is very common in business environments where collaboration is needed. An example of this type of sharing is domain-based sharing, where it's used in business environments with Active Directory. And I will give you more examples when we get to the hands-on section. Okay, so let's now talk about the different file and folder sharing permissions. So these are the permissions that you can give a user based on their request and their access level. In Windows, there's two types of permissions. There's NTFS and share. NTFS permissions is file system level control, which is applied to files and folders stored on disk volumes formatted with the NTFS file system. You can give control on who can read, modify, or delete files and folders. And keep in mind that this applies to local and network users. It's accessible to other computers on the network by setting specific permissions for users and groups, allowing controlled access to shared files. Next type of permission is to share permissions. This is a network level control permission and applies only to network users. It controls whether users can read, change, or have full control over shared folders. So let's talk about the differences between NTFS versus share and when to use each permission. Okay, so first, NTFS permissions are like the rules on the folder itself. They apply to the files and the folder, and it doesn't matter how you access them. You can access them locally or over the network. While share permissions are like rules for network access. They only apply when the folder is shared over the network. NTFS permissions also are more granular or more detailed when it comes to permissions. As you can see, they have more permissions compared to shared, and they apply to both local and network access. Now that we learned the difference between NTFS and share, you're probably wondering if we can use both permissions at the same time. And the answer is yes, but keep in mind that the key rule is when NTFS and share permissions are combined, the most restrictive applies. So to understand this concept better, I'm going to give you an example of scenario that we can apply in the workplace. So for example, we have a shared marketing folder. And the shared permissions given is full control for everyone. But the NTFS permissions for the interns group is read-only. So the marketing folder has both the shared and the NTFS permissions. So in this scenario, even though the shared permission allows full control for the marketing folder, the interns group will only have read-only access to the specific subfolders like the design and schedule subfolders due to the more restrictive NTFS permissions applied to that subfolders. In Windows file sharing, there's also explicit and inherited permissions. Explicit permissions are access rights directly assigned to a specific file or folder. They can be customized for individual objects, and keep in mind that they always take priority over inherited permissions. Inherited permissions are access rights automatically passed down from a parent folder to its child objects, meaning a child object inherits the permissions set on the parent folder by default. Here's an example of inherited permissions. If you give read access to a user on a main folder, all subfolders within that folder will automatically inherit the read permission unless explicitly changed. So when do we use explicit permissions? We use it when a specific file or folder needs different access levels than its parent folder, or to grant unique access rights to a user on a particular object. We can also disable inheritance by selecting the Disable Inheritance button. I'm going to show you later in the hands-on section on how to do this step by step. Okay, so let's now talk about the different methods and how to access shared folders efficiently. First, we have mapped drives or persistent access. Network shares can be mapped to a drive letter on a user's computer for easier access. Then we have the network path or direct access. This is when a specific folder is shared over the network and users access it via a network path. You can access shared folders directly via UNC paths. Okay, so now that we know the basics on Windows file sharing, let's now move on to the different hands-on activities so we can practice our knowledge. Okay, for the first activity, a marketing intern needs access to the marketing team's shared folder called Marketing to view content but should not modify or delete files. Alright, so let's go to our Windows server just to show you how to get this done. So just going back to our activity, it says that there's a marketing folder and the marketing intern just need to view the content, so they shouldn't be able to modify, change, or delete files in it. So should be a read-only access for the marketing interns. Alright, so let's check where the marketing folder is and find the marketing folder. So here's the marketing folder. What we want to do is to apply the permissions for this. So just right click on the folder you want to check and click on properties and click on the sharing tab on top and then go to advanced sharing here. And then this is where you can see the permissions. So in the sharing tab in here, just remember that all the permissions shared in here are the share permissions. Remember in the lecture, we talked about the two types of permission, NTFS and share. So the sharing tab is where we change or add the share permissions, not the NTFS. So if we click on the permissions here, we would see the different types of share permissions that you can give to different users or groups. So as you can see in here, there's only 3 permissions: full control, change, and read. So let's check what permissions there are for the different groups that were added in here. So everyone has just read-only permissions in here, and the marketing staff in here has full control, so they can change and read. And let's go back to our activity earlier. So let's see what we want to happen with the marketing intern. So we want the marketing intern to be able to access the marketing folder, but just to view the contents and not to modify or delete any files under. So since the marketing folder already has everyone in here with the permission read, and the marketing intern is under the group everyone in here, so we don't have to change anything in this share permissions and just leave it as is because we already have the permission that we want for the marketing intern, which is just to view or read only. So that's all good. I just want to show you what kind of permissions there is in here. So next, let us check the NTFS permissions. So NTFS permissions can be found in the security tab in here. And as you can see, there's more permissions in here compared to sharing earlier. There's full control, modify, read, and execute, list folder contents, read, write, and special permissions. And there are also different groups that you can add for this permission. Okay, so since the marketing interns are not added in this NTFS permissions yet, we are going to edit this. Just click on edit, and then we can add the marketing interns. So just look for their group name, it depends on your company. But for example, we have the marketing intern group in here. So we are going to add that because we want particular permissions just for the interns, which is just to be able to just view and not to modify or delete files. So for the marketing intern in here, as you can see, there's like default permissions added. So we're going to remove that and just make sure that only read is selected in here so that they should only just be able to view and not modify or delete files. Click apply and OK. And as you can see in here, if you scroll down to marketing intern and click on that, you would see the following permissions given to them, which is just read only. So that is how we change the NTFS permissions for a specific shared folder. Okay, for activity 2, the HR department needs a secure folder called HR group that only HR staff can access. Other employees should not see the folder at all. Okay, so let's go back to our Windows server in here and let's find the HR group folder. And then let's look at the share permissions first. So let's right click on the folder, go to properties and click on sharing tab and advanced sharing. Let's click on share this folder and click on permissions. And let's go back to our activity. So it says we only need HR staff to have access to the HR group folder. So the other employees or the rest of the employees that are not on the HR department should not see the folder at all. So how do we do this? So as you can see in here, there's a default group that's already included, which is everyone. That means that's all the employees in the company, and we don't want everyone or the employees other than HR staff to see the folder. So what we're going to do is to click on this everyone group in here and click on remove because we don't want anybody else aside from HR to see this folder. And then let's add the HR group in here. So just look for their name. For example, HR staff, click on OK. And then let's change their permission to full control since we want only HR to have the access in here. So let's click on apply for that. So as you can see in here, only HR should be able to see this folder now called HR group. Okay, so the share permission is done for HR group. And we have removed everyone. Let's now adjust and see what the NTFS permissions are for HR group. So let's click on security tab in here. And as you can see in here, HR department is not added yet. And if we click on users, we can see that they only have the read and execute and read list folder contents permissions in here. So we also want to adjust the NTFS permissions for HR, even if we already gave them full control in here and the shared permissions. Once they get into the subfolders and files under the HR group, they won't be able to do much but to just view the files because they don't have enough permissions in this level, in the NTFS level. So let's make sure to add them to this as well. So let's click on edit and add HR. Okay, just add the HR staff here and we can give them full control in the NTFS level as well. So just make sure that if you are changing something on the share permission, also check and see if the NTFS permission needs to be adjusted or changed as well. So in here, because we want only the HR staff to have access to everything, they should be able to have full control over all of their files and folders. Let's make sure that full control is selected in here and click apply. So if we click on HR staff in here, they should be allowed to do everything under their folders and files. Okay, for activity 3, a third-party vendor needs access to a temporary folder called vendor files to upload reports but should not see other files. Okay, let's go back to our server and let's look for vendor files and right-click on it and click properties. So let's go to the shared permissions first, click sharing and advanced sharing. And let's go back to the activity and it says a third-party vendor needs access to the folder vendor files to upload reports but should not see other files. So this is the only folder that the vendor need to see. So let's share this to him. or share it to them. So let's click on share this folder and then click on permissions. And it's already shared on everyone, but it only has read access. So let's add the vendor and look for their group in here. All right, so for the vendors, let's give them full control on this shared permissions because we want them to be able to upload and get to the other files under this shared folder. So let's click on apply in here. Okay, and another apply and okay. So we're all set on the shared permissions. Okay, so now let's go to the NTFS permission and see what permission we can give to the vendor. And let's go back to the activity one more time, and the only task that we want the vendor to do is to upload reports. So the vendor shouldn't see the other files under the vendor folder, and all they have to do is to upload, because there might be other vendor files in there that they're not allowed to see or read because they might be confidential. So we must restrict this permission so the vendor can only be able to do one task, which is uploading. So let's go to the security tab and then click on edit in here, and as you can see there is no vendor yet, so we have to add the vendor first. So let's look for the vendor group in here and add it. And if we want the vendor to just upload files and not to see the other files, the only permission that we can give the vendor is the write permission in here. So let us remove the read and execute, list folder contents, and read in here because they shouldn't see the other files, or they shouldn't be able to read the other files in here. Write permission is the most restrictive in here, and in this case, if you just want a certain group or user to do one task, be as restrictive as possible. So this write permission is able to do file uploads because that's the only task that the vendor can do in this shared folder. So let's click on apply in here and okay. And if we click on vendors in here, we can see that only write permission is allowed for them, not read and everything else. And just let's close on that. Okay, for the last activity, in the IT department, all techs need access to the software repository called software, but only senior IT staff should be able to access the licenses subfolder. Okay, let's go back to our server and let's click on the software folder in here and click on properties and let's check the shared permissions. Okay, so going back to our activity, it says the IT department, all the techs under IT needs access to the software folder. Okay, so this is the software folder, and let us share this folder to the rest of the IT department. So let's go to advanced sharing in here, click on share this folder, let's click on permissions, and let's add the IT department because they need access to this folder in here. Okay. So let's give them a full control, shared permissions, since all of IT needs this access to the software folder. Click on apply, okay, another apply and okay. So there's a second part to the activity and it says only the senior IT staff should be able to access the licenses subfolder. So that's kind of different from the other activities that we've done earlier. So this one is a permission for a subfolder. So let's check inside software if there is a licenses subfolder. So let's just rename this because there's a typo. So under software folder is a licenses subfolder, and it says in the activity that only senior IT staff should be able to access the licenses subfolder. Okay, so let's adjust this subfolders permission in here to only allow the senior IT to access this. So let's click on this and go to properties. And we have to change the NTFS permissions on this because it's a subfolder and we are only applying a certain permission on just this subfolder. So let's click on security, and this is where we can add the senior IT access in here. Okay, so what we want to do first is to disable inheritance from this folder and set explicit permissions to explicitly give the senior IT permissions to access this subfolder. But before we add the senior IT in here, Keep in mind that in the tutorial or lecture earlier in this video, we talked about inherited permissions and explicit permissions. So since this folder is a subfolder to the software folder in here, and we've already set the shared permission in this subfolder to share to all of IT department and give them full control in this, that means that by default, the licenses folder in here has inherited its parent folder's permission. So let's right click on this, select properties, and click on security tab in here. And we should disable inheritance first. We can see inheritance under advanced in here. And this is where you can see disable inheritance. So let's click on that. So to remove all inherited permissions from this object in here, just for this subfolder software, under software, that is licenses. Click on apply. And now you can see in here that it's denying all the users access to the licenses in here. And that's okay because we are going to add the senior IT explicitly to have permission to access this folder. Okay, so now there is no one who can access this folder but the owner. So let's change that and add explicitly the senior IT. So let's add them in here. Just search for the name. So senior IT, for example, and let's give them full control because they're the only ones who should be able to access and see this folder. As you can see in here now, only the senior IT has access in here, permission to see the folder and do something with the folder. So only the senior IT has that permission in here. There's no other groups added in here. But if we, for example, add a new folder under licenses called manuals, for example, and look at the NTFS permissions for this, so you can see it's back to the default or the regular permissions in here that's inherited in their parent folder, which is the software folder. So only licenses should have this different access or permission, which is explicitly given to it because that's what is requested in our activity. Okay, so here's a bonus question that you can answer. If a user has read permissions on an NTFS folder but full control on the share, what is their effective permission when accessing the folder over the network? So if you are interested in answering this question, please leave your answer and the explanation on your answer in the comment section below, and I would like to see your answers. And that would be it for this video. I hope that you learned something, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the comment section down below, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.